Bernie Madoff went to jail. Charles Ponzi invented it. But what in the world is going on with Social Security? Was Elon Musk correct when he said Social Security is no more than a big Ponzi scheme? Well, that will affect every one of us and the 70 million people who rely on Social Security. So let's unpack this on today's episode of the Steve Beaman Show. Welcome back, my friends, to this episode of the Steve Beaman Show. I'm Steve Beaman, of course, and it's always wonderful to spend time with you and go through this real journey with us. I've had a lot of nice people respond back to some of the episodes they've seen, and the questions have been great. The dialogue is wonderful, so I'm looking forward to getting to know more of you over time. But as you know, since you've been with me from really when we started this, our job here is to empower, entertain, and enlighten people with all that's going on in the economy, the digital transformation of the economy, and your lives. And we've been talking a lot about the economy. We've spent time talking about the unsustainable position we're in, especially if you're a Gen Z or millennial. Some of this stuff has to really just scare you, frankly. But we're talking about, in context of your life, how this stuff really matters. And I wanted to continue on that trajectory today. We're going to talk a lot about Social Security and what that really means to you. As I said in the introduction, there are about 70 million people who rely on Social Security. This is a huge program, and we don't want to be naive in how we think it's going to work or not work going forward. But as we've begun the shows lately, I want to start with that I thinkingly call the Steve Beaman Report. And I want to go through the markets today because we are seeing the markets respond to some of the talk out of the White House, especially on tariffs. And the market now, as of today, is down about 9% since Trump took office. We saw that blip up, as you may recall, when he first came in with the confidence indexes going up and people feeling pretty good about a change in direction. However, we've now seen some of that confidence really starting to die down. The Michigan index, which is a measure of confidence we spoke about, dropped significantly from 63 to, I think, 57 in the last month. So what that tells you is consumer confidence is a lot slower than it was, or slowing down from what it was. Today, as we see the S&P continuing this decline, and that's going true, by the way, in all of the indexes, whether you're NASDAQ, you're seeing the tech plays, you're seeing Bitcoin and the cryptos, commodity. We're seeing a real reset of the financial situation, and that's being caused because of fear. And if you want to quantify fear and say, how do you measure that? There's something called the VIX, V-I-X. It's an exchange-traded fund that tracks volatility in the market. Sometimes it's called the fear index. And if you look at the VIX, it's way up today. I think it came in at, it's 11% up from, a month ago. That's a big increase, I'll say, in the fear factor. So if you're feeling a little uncomfortable, you're not alone. The institutional money is feeling that way too. Now, again, I urge you not to be overly concerned about this. Markets come up and they go down. I think I've said every year you get a 10% drop in the market. That doesn't mean it will, stay down. And what we're seeing is a reaction to the fear of the Trump tariffs. We've talked in the past about how the U.S. economy has been transferring wealth to just trillions of dollars of wealth to other countries. Our current trade deficit's about $1 trillion, 200 billion of which goes to China. We're giving them our money. We can't keep doing that. We're running $2 trillion deficits. We're running these massive trade deficits, and we can't keep doing it. So what the Trump administration has hypothesized is that if they can use tariffs as a negotiating tactic, they'll be able to get companies to move back to the United States, number one. And number two, they'll get more fair trade out of our trading partners. So instead of it being one-sided against the United States, and I mentioned to you, almost all of the countries tariff our goods going into their country. So he's trying to say, look, let's get more fair trade. Now, I'm a free trader. I think we all work best when tariffs are dropped to zero. The reality is a tariff is a tax, and it makes you pay a higher price for goods and services. Now, our manufacturers in this country that create employment on the other side need to have fair trade with those other countries so that we can sell our products into them. So it's a complicated issue, but at the core, what Trump's bet is that by using this bludgeoning device to these countries, saying you can't come into the biggest economy in the world without having fair trade with us, and to these companies, come on back. I think a specific example he's talking about in Canada having cars manufacturers coming down here. If the car's made in the United States, well, then you can deduct the interest you pay on that car loan. Now, that's potentially a significant boom for the auto industry, and it should motivate people to move down here. We're seeing some evidence of that. We talked in a prior program about, I think, $3 trillion of new capital that's coming into the United States. So we're seeing some movement that supports it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But anyway, just continuing on the markets, I did want to do a shout out and a call out to my friend Chris Ruddy of Newsmax. You may or may not know of Newsmax. It's a startup news channel. I've been interviewed on Newsmax several times, and I've had the opportunity to get to know Chris Ruddy a little bit. Well, he took his company public by raising $75 million, and I think they came public yesterday. It came out at $10 a share. So you could go in and buy a share of Newsmax for $10. Well, at the end of yesterday, you would have been very happy because your $10 was now worth $85. That's an 8 times return in one day. So you might have gone to bed last night feeling good about yourself. Well, if you just waited until the end of today, that Newsmax stock ran over $200. Holy Toledo, what a grand slam that is. A 20-fold return in 2 days. Not exactly something you see all the time. And so our kudos go out to Chris Ruddy, who's now in the billionaire class, and the other folks at Newsmax who work hard. To give you a perspective on that industry, if you look at Adweek, which tracks all the time and people, number of people who spend watching TV, you have in the cable news segment a domination by Fox. They have about 3 million viewers every day, just a massive number. If you look at the top 15 programs on cable news, 14 of them, I think, are Fox programs. So clearly, Fox dominates cable news. The next closest down is MSNBC, and they're at about 1 million, so they're a third the size. And then it drops way down to CNN at about 500,000 viewers. And Newsmax right now is coming in just above CNN. But I think the bet that investors are making is that there's room for more than just Fox at the top. And I know Chris is a friend of Donald Trump's, and I know they're going to be it'll be a right-leaning newscast, and there's no question about it. But hopefully, for the investors in Newsmax, they'll be able to carry a nice portion of that advertising budget. So anyway, again, kudos to Chris Ruddy and our friends at Newsmax. But all of this economic stuff we talk about, it matters to you. It's real, and that's why we want to use the program to educate you as much as possible, to give you the information you need, not spun. We are not a political show. I mean, I have political biases on things, but in economics, we're looking at what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes we'll have different perspectives on what that means. To one person, what works isn't a working thing to another person, and to that person, what works for them may not work for the other person. So we'll talk about the good and the bad of these things, but it's hugely important for you to be educated and enlightened about what really is going on. So I want to go back and I want to continue this talk we've had about tariffs, because you're going to get a lot of media about it. And it is absolutely true that there's good, bad, and ugly to tariffs. Now, the good, if you go back historically, let's remember the United States was founded on tariffs. It wasn't until the early 20th century that we began to impose an income tax. So when Trump talks about an external revenue service as opposed to internal, well, that's the way the United States worked up until I think it's the 16th Amendment or one of the amendments that allowed for an income tax. So tariffs in the past historically have been used to a positive disposition for a developing economy. There's no question. But we've had some disasters too. And if any of you are students of history, and I know none of us watching this are probably old enough to remember the Depression. My parents were Depression era, and the people of my age have, grandparents and parents of that age. But when you look at the Depression, it peaked at about 1932 and really a little over 25% unemployment. Now, think about that. When you hear politicians today talk about how bad the economy is, that was bad. 25% of the population that wanted to work couldn't get a job. That's a really bad thing. Now, what's interesting, though, is we started to have natural market forces bring us out of the Depression by late 33, early 34. At a time when the United States government imposed what was known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act on Europe. So we began to tariff German goods, English goods, French goods coming into the United States. Well, with as fragile as the economies were, that just put us right back down into the tailspin of the Depression. And that created what became then a 10-year depression, only getting out of it with World War II. So these tariffs may have been good at one point for the U.S., showed disastrous effects during the Great Depression, just disastrous. And lately, again, the Trump tariffs are in response to, let's remember that other countries, China, Japan, Canada, England, the European Union, all of these countries, all of them, tariff United States goods. So it's not as if we're saying, oh, gee, we're going to go do this blindly. We're not. We're putting in balancing tariffs, if you will, against these countries. And I think you and I will have to wait and see if it works. I know Trump came out recently and said that we're going to have to go through a recession in order for it to get better. Well, he's being, what would be the word I would use, trained a little bit by history. He lived through the late 70s and early 1980s, as did I. And I can remember a bad economy in 78, 79, and 80. You had unemployment around 17%, interest rates at 17%, really not good. Well, when Paul Volcker became head of the Federal Reserve in 1980, and subsequently also Ronald Reagan became president, Volcker said, we're stopping inflation now. And he ran interest rates up to 17 or 18%. Well, that quelled inflation like that. So inflation was stopped. The problem is it put us into a massive recession in 1981 and 82. The response of the Reagan administration was to cut taxes. And at that time, there were a lot of brackets, with the top bracket being 70%. The Reagan administration cut it down to 3 brackets, the top being 28%. All of that money put back in the hands of the consumer and the business community was wildly stimulus. In addition to that, he put it on hyperspeed by investing in the defense sector. And a lot of that spending is positive to the economy because it creates jobs. So that situation in the late 70s and early 80s is a little bit what Trump is playing on now. He's saying that the structural economy of the United States is so desperately in need of change that we're going to have to suffer a little bit of pain to right the ship to come out on the other end. I've been on the radio and I've been publicly stating, I hope he's right. I don't think there's an assurance or a guarantee you can give that he is. It's a high risk play, but by the same token, we had to change something. And this is the plan that he's put in place to change. I have to look at that and say, okay, let's give it a shot. We will find out. So kind of tailing back and talking about the markets in that context, the markets right now are saying, we're not sure about this because it's this month of April that these tariffs are going to hit. Well, we're going to find out. I think what you'll see is if we get one settlement on these trade deals, and if Canada, pick your country, if we get one settlement, you're going to see the markets turn around and bump up rapidly because all they're looking for is some assurance that this isn't going to go into a full-blown trade war. So I think we need to watch that. But the tariffs, again, as you know and as we've talked, at the core, a tariff is a tax increase. It's got a fancy name, but that's what it is. So we're saying we're going to put an additional tax on imported goods to try to balance the trade. Inherently, that's a dangerous strategy. It certainly can disrupt supply chains. You and I came through COVID, and you remember the massive problem we had with supply chains? Most people prior to 2020 didn't even know what a supply chain was. But post-COVID, we all know what it meant. Ships couldn't get docked. People didn't know where goods and services were. It was disrupted in a major way. And unfortunately, these tariff threats are having kind of the same effect. Businesses don't know whether they should order product now or whether they should wait. If they buy it now, it's under a given tax level. If they buy it in a month, it could be higher than that. Well, if they wait 2 months, maybe they've settled it and it comes way down. That's the uncertainty in the business community. That creates and ripples through and gives consternation to the markets, which is why the VIX is so high. So all of this stuff plays together, and it especially matters for you. When you go to the grocery store or you go to the gas station, what you want to see are stable prices, because it lets you plan ahead for what you have to budget for all this stuff. When you see prices wildly swinging up and down, it makes it extraordinarily difficult for you as just a normal, regular person to plan your budget. So all I can say on the tariff thing is to be aware of it. Try to understand it from an apolitical standpoint. It's not necessarily a bad thing he's doing, but we don't know yet. And let's give some time to it. It's been, 90 days? Let's give a little time. Let's see if it works. I certainly hope it does, because we have to do something to stop transferring wealth from the United States to these other countries. And again, I want to talk specifically to the Gen Z folks and the millennials who might be watching me. I've had an opportunity to talk with a number of you, and I'm telling you, what I hear is we won't live as well as our parents. I can only say you're right. If we keep on the trajectory we're on, where we're transferring our wealth to other countries, you're not going to live as well as my generation did, because we're giving away your money. That's just the bottom line of this stuff. So when you feel uncomfortable, you're not unjustified. Now, when you tie that together with the transition to the digital economy, and we're going to have a show and a program one time on what I've called the 10-10-10 economy, that could be extraordinarily dystopian when you play it out. But when you look at that and you look and say, I'm 25 years old, I don't know what the future holds. I'm concerned about it. I would be too. When I grew up, the stability of this whole economic thing was very high. And I've said this kind of in programs before, but the 50s and 60s, the United States so dominated the rest of the world on everything: more steel, more food, more autos, more of everything. We were absolutely the dominant economy. Well, that was my growing up. Now, that started to change in the late 70s when I was coming out of high school and into college. You saw a change. But then we saw a big booming economy because we were able to bring taxes down and spend money in the military. Okay, those were good solutions. In the 90s, we were saved by technology. It was the boom of the technology era. That was the first time we'd seen that kind of explosive growth of the internet and personal computers. In the 2000s, well, we saw it start off okay because you started to get cell phones, you started to get new technologies, but then we had the abysmal disaster of 2008. Again, you were early in your years then, you were young, but that's very unsettling. And then since then, and we've talked about this, since 2010 to today, the growth we've had in the economy has been all fueled by more debt. So if you're uncomfortable with it, don't feel bad. I am too. And that's why we're doing this. If we can work together and find solutions that are positive solutions, who knows, maybe we can twist an arm on a politician and get them to think rationally for once about what's in our interest. Because ultimately, it's all about us. It's our country, and we can make it look like whatever we want. So when we're looking at the tariffs and we're looking at what this could do, I like to be an optimist. I retain my optimism that things will work out for those who keep a positive attitude and keep a good look on things, I think they're going to work. If somebody said make a bet, I'm probably 55, 60% in the I think it's going to work. But time will tell. And I'm looking forward to that first deal coming across. Now, granted, again, we've seen this 3 trillion number. That's really, really good news. That could make it all work out. But we'll wait until the markets see that for me to be happy. I look forward to that bottoming and that kind of curve up so that you and I can talk about how the markets are starting to see the reality of this. I'm a big believer that you follow the markets. I think the money is pretty smart in aggregate. So, people say to me, have you been a prepper? And I know a lot of people in the prepping community, and I'm not, because the markets haven't told me to yet. I think the markets will know when things get really crazy and they'll react. Right now, they're not saying it's really bad. They're saying, we don't really like this. We think it could dribble a little off growth in the global economy. Well, I look forward to seeing that turn back up so we can say, oh, it looks like it's going to bring up the global economy. So let's move a little bit into this issue of Social Security. When I was a young man, I was 18, 19, 20, people used to call it social insecurity. So think about that. That's 40 years ago. And people were worried about it then. So this is not a new issue. We've been wrestling with it since it came out. I think there's some historical content that you need and some context around Social Security that's very, very important. I gave a speech to a Chamber of Commerce not too long ago, and I was talking with them about the fallacy of retirement. And when I talk about it, I want to put it in this context. Prior to 1940, the idea of retiring and living off of your wealth was something only the very wealthy did, the royalty. The idea of being able to live day to day without working that day, well, very few people did that. It was unheard of. Well, now we all have been sold the idea that retirement's a natural state of being. Well, I would argue it's not. It's a little blip in history. I mean, it's been here since 1940. So what are we, 65 years into it? It's a recent thing because the U.S. had such control and growth in the wealth that it created post 1940 that we were able to create a system that had enough money that you could put it away and live off of your money from the date you retire to the date you die. I think that's pretty impressive. I think that's really cool. I know when I grew up, people were talking about living your golden years of retirement, da-da-da-da-da. And I like the idea. I think you like the idea. But increasingly, especially if you're a Gen Z or millennial, you're looking at this going, well, what about me? Will I ever get to? We're going to look for solutions so that hopefully you can. Let's go back then to what we talked about at the opening. Is Social Security a Ponzi scheme? Now, a Ponzi scheme, and you probably know this, so forgive me for being a little rudimentary, but the idea of a Ponzi scheme is simply that you pay people a return off new money you bring in. So you say, hey, Steve, I have extra money. I want to give you $1. You manage it. And I say, I'm really good at this. I can give you a 20% return a month. And you say, I've never heard of that. Go for it. So you give me $1. Now, at the end of the month, I, of course, maybe, if I'm really good, maybe made 1% with that money. So I'm 19% short of what I owe you. So I go out and get somebody else to give me $2. And I pay you back the $1.20 I owe you. I've now got 80 cents left in the bank. So I'm still alive. So I now go out to the next guy and say, I need $5. Because now I got to give the guy who gave me $2, $2.40 back. So you can see you're just getting deeper in the hole as it goes. What happened with Bernie Madoff is he had such a good reputation on Wall Street, or initially he was the president of the NASDAQ. I mean, he was a big time name on Wall Street. He went out and said, I'm going to open up my own hedge fund, and money just flowed to him, The problem was the expectations on his performance were higher than he was able to do in reality. So he started what became a big Ponzi scheme. He was paying current investors with new, fresh money. Well, he was always able to raise more, so he was able to keep his obligations up for years And at the end of the day, he burned out what, 10, $12 million, $billion for people. So Ponzi schemes are, it's the merry-go-round, right? When it stops, nobody knows, but when it does, everybody gets hurt. Billions of dollars have been lost in Ponzi schemes. It's hugely illegal. If a company were to do it, like Bernie Madoff, they go to jail. So it's not something real acceptable in society. But let's look at Social Security, because this is a program that was sold to the American people as an insurance plan. Old age security and old age survivors insurance. It was sold that way consciously because they knew the American people would never accept a transfer payment. So they couldn't go to the American people and say, well, what we're going to do is tax the worker and give it to the retiree. People would have said, no, that's not going to happen. What they did is said, this isn't a government, it's not an entitlement program. What this is an insurance program. And you will pay into this insurance fund, and then when you retire, you'll get your money back plus some interest. Well, the American people, and you have to remember again the time, this is the late 30s, coming out of the Great Depression, which an awful lot of people thought the United States could not survive. There was a lot of fear that the U.S. as an enterprise would fail. So when they put in Social Security and said, we're going to start to guarantee that people don't die hungry, most Americans said, okay, we've never had programs like this in the government, but let's give it a try. So they came up and they said, this is an absolute insurance program, and people bought in. Couple of key statistics that you should know. At the time it started, they set the retirement age at 65. Okay? Just like it is today. But do you know the life expectancy then? I think I've used 65 in the past, but I was wrong. The life expectancy was 62. So they were expecting to start paying out your benefits after you had died. So this was in no way like insurance to help you live a better life. It was, wait a minute, when you die, your wife can get some money, so she's not left destitute. More importantly, at the time that it was created, there were 5.1 workers for every retiree. So let's assume in today's math, the average retiree gets about $30,000 a year. So if you have 5 people supporting that, that's $6,000 each. So again, if you look at the average individual making $50,000, they're paying out 12% of their income so that this person can live their old age. You don't like it, but okay, possible. I go back to why young people need to feel a little bit concerned about it. The retirement age is still 65, and you can change it. It's 66 on some programs. It can go up to 67, and you can delay it a little bit, but let's call it 66. Well, here's the difference. Life expectancy today is 76. So instead of having a grace period where you die at 62 and we accumulate your asset until 65, we now are saying, wait, you're going to retire at 66 and live an additional 10 or 12 years. And we're seeing that exponentially grow, by the way. That life expectancy, there are some funny numbers on how that's calculated. The actual life expectancy from a person at 65 is higher than that because it negates problems in young people. But so you look and say, okay, wait a minute. Now we're paying out a whole lot more than we ever did. True. There's a bigger statistic that matters. Remember, I said when it started, there were 5.1 people per retiree. Today, that number is about 2.2. So what you have, go back to that example I used, the average person gets $30,000, the average worker making 50. If the average person working 30 is only supported by 2 of those people, well, now instead of being $6,000, it's $15,000. That's not sustainable. And it's getting worse every day as our population doesn't increase. And the U.S. right now has a population replenishment rate of about 1.6, 1.7, meaning that when two parents die, they haven't created enough children to replace themselves. So we're seeing natural organic growth of our population decline. That's the reason Elon Musk said that's his biggest fear. But if you look at that and take that demographic change going forward, and you look at the ability or inability that people have to, they're the ability to live so much longer, this whole thing gets funny. Right now, the trust fund, which is what it's called, and it's not really a trust, it's a basket of U.S. Treasury bonds, because what happens when you put money into Social Security through your tax and your employer's tax, it's a total of about 13% tax, something 12.5%, 13%. When that money goes to the government, they put it in Social Security, then they go in and take the cash and put a bond in it. So it's a government bond. They're, given full faith and credit, we'll pay this back. So the trust fund is filled with these government bonds. The problem is that trust fund is bleeding down now because the money coming in to do the transfer payment doesn't match the demand of the people taking the money out. So they're bleeding down this trust fund. And the best estimate now is by 2035-ish, that's going to run out of money. So now it's only these people paying in that are paying these benefits, and there's not enough of them. So you have this problem with Social Security that it's not sustainable. Is it a Ponzi scheme? By definition of the law, probably not. In the way it operates, yeah, it probably is. And what's happening now, just like at the end of any Ponzi scheme, the fresh money coming in isn't big enough to do it. So we're going to start talking about things, and I'm getting questions, I think. Let me take a quick look. People are free to send me stuff. And that was just a question about Social Security. And the answer is, for all you younger folks, yes, I am going to talk about possible solutions to this. So just bear with me 1 minute. We've established that the math doesn't work. We've established that this thing is going to run into real problems. So how do we fix it? Can we fix it? And I will suggest to you that there are 3 things that can fix this. Let me give you one more statistic. I think this is fascinating. If you said to me, well, is it a good investment? And I get that a lot. People say, well, Social Security, is it a good investment? I'm putting money away. I'm going to get that money back, right? The average person puts into Social Security about $300,000. Okay. So over the course of your working life, that's an average person's contribution. Now that counts the employer contribution and all that. The return on that, on average, runs about $450,000 to $500,000. So if you do the math on it, you find out that that's like a 2% return on your money. Not exactly happy days are here again. If, though, you took that same contribution and put it into the U.S. market, where you're participating in the growth of the economy, well, now that money wouldn't be worth $500,000. It would be more like 1.2 to 1.5 million. So I think you have to ask yourself, which would you prefer? The safety and security of the government return, which will return me $500,000, or some variability by playing in the size of the economy of the United States, that gives me 1.5 million. Well, that's a judgment only you can make. That's why I was saying economics once was called the dismal science. And the reason it is because it's kind of science and it's kind of philosophy. Risk, reward. On the riskless side, I get a 1-2% return. On the reward side, I get maybe 8%, but I'll have some volatility. Only you know which makes more sense. But if you put it in the context of Social Security, it helps you understand that this has been a fancy wealth transfer program. And they did it to, I won't say save the country, but they did it in part of an effort to say, we're not going to let old people starve. The problem is, again, if you're 25 years old and you're looking at this, you're saying, yeah, but if the trust is going to run out in 10 years, how am I possibly going to get it? And I'm going to get taxed through the nose to pay for the people retiring in the next 10 years. So how do we fix it? What do we do? Is there a way? And the answer is yeah. I think you have to, again, put in context of why it was there, put in context the changes in demographics. Again, this idea that you've gone from 5 people to 2 people and that we're living longer and all the rest. I think there are 3 things that you can do. You have to pick one of these or a combination. You can raise taxes so that the newer entrants into the job force, the younger people coming in, simply pay a much higher tax rate to pay for the people on the other end. Well, I'm not a big fan of that, and I don't think you are. So I think we can pretty well throw that out. We can cut benefits. And the way to do that that's most often put forth is we do what's called means testing to Social Security. And what that means simply is that if you have enough private wealth and you cross a certain threshold, so let's assume you have $2 million that you've put away on your own. You built a business and sold it, or you've just invested smartly, and you're pulling in from that $2 million $100,000 a year. Well, the government might say, well, you already make enough. You don't need Social Security. Well, that would certainly cut that pool of 70 million down quite a bit. The problem is those of you who've worked for it and paid into it because it was sold to you as an insurance program are going to be screaming, hey, you can't do that. That's my money. And it is. Social Security is very different than the other entitlement programs because it is sold to you as an insurance program. You put money in, you get your money out plus a return. When you go to an insurance company, they don't say, well, you've done so well, you don't need your money back. No, you sue them. Well, this is the same. Are you going to get to be 60 whatever years old and retire, and you've done really well for yourself, and now the government's going to say, we're not going to give you your money back? I don't think people are going to be happy with that. So you have this issue of, can we raise payroll taxes? No. Can we cut benefits? Not like that. I think we come to a third, and I want to persuade you. And you'll find that in a lot of these shows, I'm trying to persuade one idea. And I hope you'll consider this. And I'm obviously welcome to take questions about it. But it's the third option I think we have to look at. And that third option is simply to raise the retirement age. I think we need to be realistic and raise retirement vis-a-vis Social Security to something like 72 years old. Now, if you're sitting there at 60 saying, wait a minute, that's not fair. You're right, and I don't want to do it to you. I think we take people that are entering the market up to about age 40, and we say, for you, your retirement age is going to start going up till we hit about 72. We've done stuff like that in the past. Again, it's gone from 65 to 66, 67. I think we can do it. And I don't think people will resist it that much because they do recognize I'm living a lot longer than I ever have. And at some point, you have to look at your children and say, I can't saddle you with this much debt. It's not fair to them. So I think that third option is what you're going to see play out over time. I think you're going to see them just extend out the retirement age. And by doing that, you slow the money going out of the system, and it gives the chance for fewer workers to fix that. Now, if you say, is it a permanent fix? I think it could be. I certainly would extend the trust fund out way beyond 2035. But we have to then look in context too of longer term things happening to the economy. We're talking heavily on this program about the digital economy that's coming. In the digital economy, you are greatly reducing the workforce, greatly, but you're greatly increasing the productivity of the system. It's a time in life with no scarcity. It's a weird economy. But my point being, if you're in your 20s or 30s now and you're looking and say, well, I'm not going to get Social Security until I'm 70, that's true. But you're going to be living in a much more resource-rich environment, generally speaking, because we're going to have this lack of scarcity because everything will be produced for us. I'm going to digress here because I find this stuff fascinating. We talk about AI and, the benefit of artificial intelligence. One of the problems with AI, and this was brought up to me by a Gen Zer, they said they didn't feel it was ethical to use AI. And I said, how do you mean that? Because I don't get it. And they said it consumes so much energy that it's not green for the environment, and it's stealing energy resources from people who need it. I don't agree with that, but I understand it. And that's a well thought out reason. Okay, I get that. They've tied ethics into the environment, which I understand that. And they've tied the use of AI to that. Okay, I get it. So just in the last few days, I was looking at a brand new computer technology, and this will blow your mind. What they have done is created a biologic computer. It uses human neurons from our brain and neural nets tied into hard semiconductors. Now, by doing this, they've created, again, an organic thing. The advantage of it, not only is it a lot faster than current computers, but it consumes about 1/100th of the current energy of a big computer that would be used to process AI. So we're eliminating that ethical bias. I think that's really cool. I'm very excited to see this. These computers are now coming out and they're being in prototype development. But I think because I am a big AI believer and I think it's inevitable, I think we have to embrace it. We don't have a choice. I think that's really cool that we can begin using AI in a world in which it doesn't draw down the energy that we have and that we've had to do in the past. I think that's really wonderful. So that goes back again, just bringing all this back around as we talk about the Social Security system. If you're earlier ages, if you're 50 and up, and you're like me, you're a late boomer or an early Gen Xer, Social Security is going to be there for you. There's no question about it. It's for the younger people. Again, people 40 and under, are you going to get it? And that's going to be a matter of how we legislatively deal with it. But you're going to have to be aware of it. You're going to have to vote for people who will support it. I hope that you won't just vote to raise taxes. And I hope you won't vote to means test it, because that kind of segregating economy into you stand for this and you get that doesn't work. And we'll talk about that in another program. The jealousy economy does not work. So I hope when you look at the solution to it, you'll say, I don't want to raise taxes on young people. I don't want to quit benefits to people who invested in it, what they were told was an insurance program. Rather, let's adjust it for the retirement age and life expectancy that was to a more updated version of it. I think that's a sellable thing, and I think we could probably get something like that through the legislative process that we have. So if we look at it, we've got to do it. There's another part of this that I want to talk about on why it's so important to fix it. You hear a lot of talk right now about deficits. And I've talked to you about it. We're running about a $2 trillion deficit, meaning as opposed to debt. And again, if you already know this, forgive me. I don't want to say something so rudimentary, but the debt is the aggregate of something where the deficit is the real time. So if you're making $100,000 a year and you're spending $200,000, you have a $100,000 deficit. If you do that for 10 years, you have a $1 million debt. So in the U.S., we have a $2 billion deficit and a $36 trillion debt. Now, how do we fix that? That's a tough one. Again, you're seeing a lot of battles in this country right now over the Doge thing. And I'm going to do a program on Doge because I think it's misunderstood. What Doge is trying to do is say to you, the average American citizen, when you send $1 to Washington, something like at least 20% of it is just thrown away. It's wasted. Well, that's not something any of us want. I frankly don't know how anybody disagrees with that. But I want to share numbers with you to put in perspective why it has to happen. As I said, we're borrowing about $2 trillion right now. We bring in roughly $5 trillion to our economy today. Do you know where that money goes? Most people don't. Most people say, well, it's defense spending or it's international, giveaways. It's U.S. aid, whatever. No, it's not. It's Social Security. Of that $5 trillion, $1.5 trillion, about 22%, give or take, 1.5 trillion of it is Social Security payments. That's where the money's going. Now that's number one. Go down number 2 and 3, Social Security, plus then Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare and Medicaid about another 1.4 trillion. So there's 3.9 trillion of the 5 trillion. The fourth, and this is where everybody's like, oh, it's got to be defense. No, it's interest on the debt. That's running now about 1.1 trillion. There's your 5 trillion. I don't know how to more expressly state that. All of the tax money you send, all of it, corporate taxes, sales taxes, tariffs, income taxes, employment taxes, all of that aggregated is spent in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. The next one down is defense. It's about 900 billion. And below that is about $1 billion of other stuff. But those are borrowed. So how do we fix that? If we just keep raising taxes, it's not going to work. People will just, there's an old thing that if you want more of something, you reward it. And if you want less of something, you penalize it. So if we want less economic growth, we raise taxes. If we want more economic growth, we cut taxes. But we got to do something. We can't keep borrowing the $2 trillion that we're doing. Now, the current administration is making a bet. It is saying that, I can cut out a lot of this budget because in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, there's a lot of fraud. And it may be, we don't know that number yet, but let's assume that 20% of that's fraud. Well, that's $800 billion that it frees up. In the Defense Department, there's probably another $200 billion of fraud. Now there's $1 trillion. So we're starting to whittle it down. You can't change interest, right? So if we can save even $1 trillion, that means now we have to borrow $1 trillion to keep the wheels on the bus. The way to get out of that is to grow the economy. Well, the way to grow the economy isn't through government spending. And I'm sorry if somebody out there, I know I'm going to get a note about it or a text about somebody saying, well, government, I'm a Keynesian. I believe government can facilitate growth in the economy. No, we need private capital to build the private economy. And that's why you hear me harp on this Trump $3 trillion tax thing. This is huge because it puts private capital to work so that you have a job that can generate excess wealth that you can then put away so that you can retire someday. The way to get back to having the opportunities that prior generations have had is to build that private economy and not build it on debt. That's just the bottom line of it. And I know there are people who philosophically disagree with that. I'm welcome to discuss it. I welcome that dialogue because I don't have all the answers. I'm working with you on this, and it's a community that we are working on together to make this stuff happen. But we need to do some changes here. And I think one of the changes will be that we take Social Security and we bump up the retirement age. That's just a recipe that we've got to do. Again, I go back. If we say to people, we're going to raise taxes on corporations. Okay, I had this debate 15 years ago on TV. You don't get paid by corporations when you raise their taxes. What happens is you go out to ABC Company and you say, you made $1 billion last year. We're going to tax 20% of that. So we want $200 billion of it. So that $200 billion goes to the government. Now strip off, of $200 billion, strip off $40 billion for waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm sorry, that just happens. So you now have $160 billion, which the government can redistribute however it wants. If you look at the government's performance in developing private companies like Solyndra and a bunch of these, they don't do very well, but they get $160 billion. What happens then is the company just raises prices. So you're now going to pay more for the product that you buy from that company because they have to offset that cost of doing business. They're not paying the tax, you are. And every time you get people who want to go into the jealousy economy and say, look at that company, they're making a huge, the company's going to charge you for the taxes. And if you're a small business, you understand it. When you get a regulation or a tax from the government, you have to raise your prices. It's a cost of doing business. No different if you're in a restaurant. If egg prices go up, you have to raise prices. If taxes go up, you have to raise prices. Who's paying for it? The consumer. And I can get on a little high horse about this because I get frustrated when people complain about tariffs. Oh, you're just raising prices for the consumer. Well, they understand it there, but then they look across the aisle and they say, but let's raise taxes on Apple. Let's pick our company of the week that we don't like. Let's raise taxes on them. What's the difference? You raise taxes, tariffs, whatever you want to call it, you raise prices to consumers. It's as crystal clear as it is. So as we look at Social Security and we look at this deficit, the way out of it is to grow. It's to put more money in the hands of the private individuals so that they then can spend that money as they want. People are pretty efficient allocators of their own capital. Again, if that company says, instead of spending $200 billion in taxes to the government, I have $200 billion in cash. I'm going to buy another company. I'm going to build another company. I'm going to invent a new technology. I'm going to grow my global distribution. They'll make choices with that $200 billion that build the private economy. So I think as you look at it, I would hopefully persuade you that you can't tax your way out of the problems this time. We have to, I'll digress for a minute again. When you go back to the end of World War II and you look at the way people's attitudes were, and we had a 90% tax rate at the end of World War II. It was a very tiered tax system. Now, nobody paid it because you had deductions everywhere. The government was trying to tell you where to spend your money. So you got deductions for credit card interest, home ownership, all of the home was deductible, one way or the other. It's just all over the place. You could go out to dinner and deduct it. So the government was telling you, okay, we want you to spend your money here. If you don't, we're going to tax it away from you. So people spent their money in those places. That helped explode the economy again because people went out and spent. Now, today, if you said, well, we're going to raise taxes to 90%, you'd have to go back and give them all those deductions again. Interestingly, in 1950, and again, somebody's going to hit me on these numbers. Don't quote me on the number. I know I'm right thematically, but I'm not on the right number. In 1950, I'll bet if you look at federal, state, and local governments, they were about 20% of the economy. So that tells you that the effective tax rate on the economy was about 20%. So you could say, well, we had a marginal tax rate of 90%. Nobody paid it. They took all the deductions. The government's total take was about 20%. Today, I think total all in federal, state, and locals like 30%. So even though marginal tax rates are down, government take is higher. If you're following the logic. So what we want is to grow the underlying private economy because that's what creates jobs. It's what creates opportunity. It's what creates wealth. And that in turn gives more money to the government so they can do the good things. And you could argue defense is good or bad, but they can do some defense. They can do these other things, but we have to build the private economy to do it. So I would appreciate, as always, talking with people about it. I get a lot of questions on Social Security. The number one is, will it be there? And the answer is, depending on what we do, I think it will be. Because government, worst case, they're just going to raise taxes. I just don't want to see it because it's depressive to the economy at large. So I would very much like to see them not just go out and raise taxes. But if we look at that, the answer is yes, you're probably going to get your Social Security. Will the taxes go up? You tell me. We had 5 people paying for each retiree. Now we have 2. And that number is just going to keep going down. We've talked about the demographics, and those are big numbers you can't change. They just are what they are. So I think it's likely you're going to see a little bit of a tax increase. Right now, We cap Social Security at like 160,000 a year. I think I forget the number. So above it, you don't pay Social Security. I think we're going to see that number go up, which is a tax increase. But I think it would be, as frustrating as it is, I think you could probably sell it to the American people, but you'd have to see it in concert with something like changing the retirement age. So the question just came in also on this biologic computer I'm talking about. AI and robotics, machine learning, and all this stuff to me is going to change the way we live. No question about it. It's going to create a lack of scarcity on most things because automation and robotics will just produce it at virtually no cost. But that has a cost, maybe, in employment, because you're going to transition people out of traditional jobs into new jobs. I think those new jobs will be their own jobs created with their own creativity, because I think it's an idea economy we're headed into. So, that technology of that, and I'll give you more on that later, but the only thing I can tell you is it's a terrific, terrific opportunity for all of the technology community to see an exponential growth in capability. So I had one more, and I'll try to cover that real quick, and it gets back to the idea of tariffs. Well, the whole tariff thing, and we talked about it, if the goal is free trade, and I've said openly on TV and radio and on the podcast, I want to see free trade. I would like to see all trade tariffs between Canada and the United States gone. I'd like to see totally free trade zone. I think that motivates business behavior. It motivates higher transaction rates. It motivates this kind of positive economic growth that we want to see. But will we see it? And that's the question. I don't know. I think you have a new prime minister in Canada. We're going to have to see how they ultimately respond. We don't know what's going on in the backdoor deals. We just know what we see in the public. Watch the markets. They'll know. When you start to see a resolution to this, I think you'll see the markets starting to run up. The VIX may be coming down. So again, it's been fun with you once again. I love it. And I hope you'll join me for a future episode of the show. I do want to say once again, kudos to my friend, Chris Ruddy of Newsmax. Well done, Chris. That's quite the accomplishment. Not everybody gets to take their baby public and see it grow like he has done. But keep in touch. If you've got questions, send them please to questions@stevebeamanshow.com. That's questions@stevebeamanshow.com. And don't forget, you can see us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can see us on any of the social media programs. And I welcome your feedback. And I am glad that you'll join the community we have of people out to really enlighten, empower, and entertain each other so we can have a good time and we can see some growth in our personal lives. Thanks as always. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you on the next round.